I got to say, I'm a little bit emotional there because when I was where you are, starting my teaching career, I was really privileged to spend the first 9 years of my teaching career in Williams School in Moncton. So actually to hear him speak then was just a little bit... Ooh. Anyway, what I can tell you is that he would absolutely love this today and love the presentations that the students have done so far. So, yeah, some of you may have heard me talking about physical literacy and how this concept is more than sport and physical activity. It's underpinned by an idea that we are one whole embodied being. That is, we do not have a body, but we are our body. And this is why I've been so pleased to see some of the student presentations so far this morning that have really shown the education of the whole child and the whole child involved in their learning in a truly embodied way. Unfortunately, in Western culture, we tend to treat the body as a separate object. We train it to look a certain way. We dress it to look a certain way. And physical literacy challenges this objectification of the body, which is potentially so damaging from a mental health perspective. Instead, it recognizes that everything we experience physically in an embodied way affects us not only physically, but socially, emotionally, and cognitively as well. And we should be working to ensure that all people have the opportunities for positive and fulfilling physical experiences right throughout life and in a range of environments. The underpinning philosophies of physical literacy recognize that we are created through our physical embodied interaction with the world. The way that we are today began from our earliest physical interactions with the world. Our bodies are a network of sensors and receptors that take information from the world around us. And as we grow and develop, we need to make sense of this information, and our brains need to learn to process it. In early childhood, sensory stimulation and movement link and integrate all of these systems through a process called sensory motor integration. Information from our senses, through reaching, grabbing, crawling, climbing, and so on, is passed through our central nervous system and stimulates neural pathways in our brains. When pathways between nerve cells are fired in response to a stimulus, a layer of fatty acid called myelin coats the neural pathway. You can see it there in red. The more the pathway is used, the more that myelin coats that pathway. And the faster the connection and the more efficient that connection becomes. Early childhood is a time of rapid myelination of millions of connections in the brain, literally building our brains. This process is crucial as it is how our brain makes sense of the information that it receives, and it is myelination that enables higher order cognitive processing. Therefore, sensory stimulation through movement and physical interaction with the world is what lays the foundations for later learning. The literature identifies that 7 or 8 years of movement and play are required to give the child a sensory motor intelligence that is the foundation for intellectual, social, and personal and physical development. Luckily for us in Wales, with the foundation phase, it is play that consists of the adaptive responses that make sensory integration happen. There is also an increasing body of evidence from the world of neuroscience. We all love a bit of neuroscience, don't we? And it highlights the importance of movement in development. In fact, there is evidence that movement in childhood is linked to social, cognitive, psychological development. Language emerges as children physically interact with their surroundings, with studies showing that movement skills are linked not only to language development, but also emotional regulation and academic self-perceptions. Our own research in West Wales found that children who had the highest physical competence scores had a direct correlation to the highest academic scores, not only in their snapshot maths, their reading age, their spelling age, but also their perception about themselves. And our study is not the only one that's shown that. The Millennium Cohort Study, which tracks the children born in the year 2000, shows that children at the age 5 data point, those children with the poorest physical competence scores had the poorest academic performance and poor social and language development. So there is a direct relationship with our physical development and our academic and cognitive development. One of the most important it seems, if we are to move our minds, we need to move our muscles. One of the most important sensory systems that is being integrated and developed in early childhood is the vestibular system. This is the system of balance in our inner ear. It's made up of 3 semicircular canals or tubes full of fluid and lined with tiny hairs, and it sends information about where we are in relation to gravity. The brain learns to process this information from the vestibular nerve, and it tells us where we are and helps us to keep our balance. It is vital if, as a species, we are able to stand, to walk, and to move. You may have already worked with some children who like to spin, to climb and hang and race about. This is them making sense and integrating these systems, especially working out information from their vestibular system, especially those children that like to look through their legs, hang, be upside down, look over the back of sofas, etc. You might also have messed up your own vestibular systems playing a game perhaps in the student union or at a party. Have any of you ever played that game where you get a hockey stick or a broom handle and put your head on it and go round and round and round and round it? And then there's usually a pint or a prize that you have to then run to pick up. Yeah, does that sound familiar? What happens when you look up and try and run after you've spun round and round your broomstick? You can't run in the direction that you want, because what you've done actually is you've spun the fluid around inside those tubes in the vestibular system, and you've spun them. When you stand up, the fluid is still spinning. So the information that's coming from that system to your brain about where you are in relation to gravity is all messed up until it calms down. So the vestibular system is super important. And alongside the vestibular system, what children are doing here, you can see they're also learning to develop their muscular and their strength system. Gaining control of the motor system happens from the top down, and early on, baby needs to gain control of their neck and head to start to integrate the vestibular and the visual system together. This is really important so that they can focus on their mum or their carer and start to learn facial expressions, non-verbal communication, and verbal cues. So the head and neck are stable, and the shoulders and the core then get stronger. We need a strong core and stable shoulders to be able to sit out and reach and grab and crawl, and eventually to stand. And through the integration of our motor system with the balance, with our core, then we can walk, run, climb, etc. So we can see that motor development skills in children not only lay the foundations of learning, but also for physical activity and as such, broader health-promoting behaviours as well. Don't freak out by that, I'm just going to tell you about it. This is research in the field of motor development that shows us that in early childhood there is a really complex relationship between physical activity, motor development, perceived competence, and fitness that actually impacts on whether we will later enter a positive spiral of physical activity and as such a positive health trajectory, or a negative spiral of disengagement and put us at risk of a very negative health trajectory. Looking more closely at this relationship, we can see that in very early childhood, the amount of physical activity that we do drives how competent we will become. The arrow moves from the physical activity to the competence. But as we get older, the more competent we are, then the more we will do physical activity. So the arrow drives back in the other direction as we move from early childhood through to middle childhood. This relationship is further complicated from work in the field of psychology about this perception and the perception of ourself and the development of our global self-esteem. This work tells us that we have perceived competencies that go together to create our global self-esteem, and one of them is our perceived physical competence. It's actually one of the most highly influential in influencing our global self-esteem. So the relationship to our long-term physical activity is more complicated by this, because if we think we're good at something, we're more likely to engage in it. So how we perceive ourselves in our physical competence affects whether we're going to engage in it. This is really important for us in early childhood, specifically in the foundation phase, because the good news from the world of psychology is that under the age of about 7, children are really inaccurate at judging whether they're good at something or not. So if you praise them or if they try really hard, they think they're really great at something, even if you can clearly see maybe they're not quite as talented as they think they are, as fast at running or high at jumping as they think they are. So this gives us a fantastic magic window of opportunity to ensure that we get the children to be competent movers. And I'm not talking about elite sports people. I'm saying that we give them the skills to feel that they are proficient in the basics, a broad movement vocabulary that lays the foundation for movement. Because it's in this window of opportunity in the foundation phase when they're happy to engage and they haven't already said, oh, I'm not good at that anymore. I don't perceive myself to be a good mover, so I'm opting out. Getting those children to feel competent so that they enter a positive spiral of engagement is crucial not only from an educational perspective, from our cognitive development and our physical and mental health perspective, but also in relation to resilience, because some of the evidence shows us that physical activity creates the conditions that we need for resilience. Okay. Unfortunately, there's a problem in that children do not magically learn all of the physical skills we need to lay those foundations for movement. It's been a misconception over the years that if children play enough, they will learn these skills. Motor skills have to be taught just as we have to teach children to read. You wouldn't dream of giving children a big pile of letters and thinking that if they play with them long enough, they will automatically learn to read. It's the same with their physical development. Teachers need to understand the developmental stages and movement patterns of motor skills and set up the appropriate tasks and environments to support children based on the children's stages of development. The same as ensuring that the texts you give them are at an instructional level in order to teach them to read. To help teachers to develop this knowledge, we've worked with motor development specialists from the States and across Europe, and drawn on the work of Jackie Goodway in the USA, her successful kinesthetic instruction for preschoolers, which is why we call it SKIP, and developed it to fit with our play-based curriculum in Wales in the foundation phase and call it SKIP Cymru. There are some students in here that may have attended a training that the Teaching Society put on for you as students in the last couple of months at the campus in Carmarthen. With the SKIP Cymru programme, we train teachers to understand children's developmental stages in their motor skills, to plug a gap that we saw in the foundation phase in terms of children's physical development, where children were developing broadly in their physical literacy, but not developing some of their what we call object control skills, which is vital as these are highly predictive of later physical activity. And excitingly, a review by the Government's Health and Social Care Committee published last month has recommended that Welsh Government rolls this programme out to all schools in Wales, and we're awaiting their response to that, but I'm not holding my breath. Anyway, so if you haven't attended a SKIP Cymru training, what could you do in your practice from today onwards to just ensure that you're laying some of these foundations for children's physical skills? Well, the first thing I'd say is make sure you're delivering the foundation phase in the way that it's supposed to be delivered. That is active and play-based, with an emphasis on outdoor learning as an integral part of students' experiences. And I'm very encouraged by the presentations I see from students today that is happening, certainly with those of you in the room. There should be some balance of children's free play, and free play is really important in terms of exposure to loose parts and natural environments, but also ensuring that you still maintain that focused physical development sessions. And it's in these physical plan development sessions that we can have a look at some key pointers. We want to make sure that children have lots of opportunities to practice tasks and observe and check that they are practicing those skills and tasks correctly. Okay. We do this by making sure that we have lots of equipment, not, as I did see not so long ago out in a school, one ball with a group of 8 or more children to be passed around. We want the children, certainly in foundation phase, to be having multiple experiences of the equipment, so not working really in any more than on their own or in pairs or very small groups. A key message is no queuing. I don't know what children learn in a queue other than to annoy the child in front of them or behind them, and it's certainly a waste of their physical development time if they're spending it in a queue waiting to take part in an activity. Give specific praise to children like you do in other areas of the curriculum that are linked to what you want them to do. Like, I like the way that you have your hands ready to catch, to remind them of the aspect of the task that you want. In a practical session, demonstration is always better than verbal instructions. You need to be mindful of mirroring, because if you do something to one side, the children are going to see it as the opposite. If you're not confident or competent enough to demonstrate some of the basic physical skills, there will be children in your class, and use them to help with demonstrations, and use that also as a way of praising and supporting an outcome that you're aiming at. In summary, we want to make sure that you use good demonstration and prompts, good constructive feedback, that you've planned your physical development session with an understanding of where that child is developmentally, so that it's appropriate and not just a time for children to let off steam and run about. Make sure there is no queuing, or the queue police will come and arrest you. Make sure that children have lots of time on task with lots of access to the curriculum. So I think it'd be nice if perhaps you saw some of the Skip Cymru work in action in one of our schools in West Wales. That actually doesn't exist anymore. It's been amalgamated and changed, so we're quite happy to show you this. Okay, so I know that might look like any run-of-the-mill physical development sessions, but what's key to those is that the activities and the equipment and the tasks have been specifically chosen based on the children's stage of development. So a bit like walking into a room where children are all reading, you as a teacher would know that perhaps they were on a task at the appropriate level. We know those children are doing tasks that are appropriate to move them in their physical development. So thank you very much.